Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished and respected professional, a fellow member of the YPO from California, USA, Molly Blomquist. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Molly is the Chief Executive Officer. She's an expert in risk management, high stakes negotiations, interrogation techniques, artificial intelligence, body language analysis, and security strategy and planning. And as I mentioned, she's a member of the YPO. So, Molly, before we talk risk management and a lot of the other areas of your expertise, tell me about your own journey and what got you interested in the field of security and risk management.
Sure. It started from a very young age. So growing up, our grandparents lived next to us, and my grandmother's brother would come over. His name was Uncle John, and Uncle John was in the FBI. And I thought that was really interesting as a young kid. And he would tell stories about his tales and about his journeys in the FBI, and he loved it. And I found that every time he would visit, I just loved hearing stories from him, and I was enthralled. So it kind of hooked me at a young age. And so after college, I started working as a government contractor, then eventually with the US government, and then now branching out on my own. And it's been a journey that's been lifelong. My father was in the military, and I have other family members in government service. So it's just kind of always been in our blood a little bit, I think.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you. So let's talk about risk management, high-stake negotiations, and interrogation techniques. My first question to you, Molly, is what are some common misconceptions about the field of security and risk management that you come across?
I think that's a great question. I think a lot of times people think it's simply about guns, guards, and gates, not to just water it down. But I think they think it's just about physical security. And there's so much more. Cybersecurity, IT, with everything going now with the world, making sure that your computer is safe, that you're not only for your business, but for your personal, and that your employees have safety there and understand the value of it is tremendous. There are so many people still today who do not know what a VPN is or why you should use it. Or they think that cybersecurity is just an IT issue. They think our IT department will handle this. There's no big deal. And they do not think about phishing scams or scams, to get you to click a link that will then put a virus on your computer. And so it's really that educational. And also, another thing is risk management. It's not about avoiding risk. It's about learning what risk you want to accept and digest. And if there's risk that you do not want to accept, well, what is it? What is too much? And what are we willing to do? And are there any other safeguards we want to put around it? It's not a one size fits all solution. So I think that's a big thing. Is it's not just for large corporations. It can be for small and medium corporations, and even for just single businesses, single owner businesses. It's really protecting. It's an investment, and people see sometimes security as a cost. They sometimes do not put a dollar sign to, if you have great loss prevention techniques, if you have great sound cybersecurity, you are preventing theft and you're preventing loss of data.
You're so right. People look at the cost initially, but when they're hit with a challenge, then those costs become significantly larger. But
absolutely, it really is an investment. And I think, whatever size your business is, if you can change your mindset to realize that it's an investment, it is money well spent.
Well said. I also wanted to ask you a few questions on interrogation, but what are some of the key components of an effective interrogation?
Sure. I think, one of the big things is you could have the most skilled interviewer, interrogator, insert whatever word you want to. But if they do not build trust and rapport, it's an uphill battle. You want to make sure that the person across from you feels comfortable. A lot of people, I would say, misconception thinks that you have to go in, it's about power and dominance. And really, if you think about it, even in your life and in your work, were you more likely to speak with somebody or to want to to want to work with somebody who you felt was working with you and engaging with you, or somebody who was aggressive towards you. And so if you can build that skill and rapport, yet still convey confidence. Because if the person does seem like they're not confident or they don't want to be there, it'll tend to lead that you will not be as forthcoming and you will think that you have control over the person. And a big thing that goes, nonverbal cues. I think they say that communication is 70% nonverbal.
Yeah.
And so it's paying attention. Are there shifts in body language? Are there shifts? Does somebody seem overly eager or overly defensive? When you're asking them a certain question, are they starting to move, which is called an anchor shift? Are they starting to become closed up? Or do they start avoiding eye contact? So paying attention to those cues can give you telltale signs if they're comfortable or uncomfortable or possibly concealing something. And then one of the other things, I mean, there's many more, but controlling your emotions. The person that you might be speaking with, whether it's a high stakes negotiation, it's an interview, whatever it is, they may have beliefs or thoughts that are not congruent with yours. And it's having the emotional intelligence and maturity to know to put that aside, to control your emotions, to make sure that you're getting to your achieved objective and you're not letting emotions get in the way of your goal.
Well said. Great response. But tell me, Molly, you were giving me some pointers of body language. Is this some kind of a training that one has to go through, or is it just something through experience you are able to pick up?
I think it's a little bit of both. So to achieve certain levels, whether it's law enforcement, it's government, it could be military or private companies, there will be certain skill sets. There's schools that are private only to certain organizations, and then there are public facing schools and educational institutions that can teach you similar techniques. And so you can learn, I mean, there are plenty, like you spoke about books. Years ago, there were not as many books on certain topics, leadership, and now there's a plethora. There's the same, you can find a lot of books on it, but the best way to do it is practice.
That's it. And you also mentioned that you worked with the US government. How did your work with the US government shape your understanding of global security and other global challenges, which you're now using as an independent business person?
I think I'll give it the analogy of, growing up in a small town. So you know your small town, you know your community, and you may know a little bit of the fringes. And then as you get older, when you start to move out, you start to see whether it's other towns, it's other counties, other states, other countries, your perception changes based on the new information that you digest. And so being able to travel the world and experience different countries and see different cultures, different ways of how business is conducted, it fundamentally changes you because it has you think, if you're open to it, is that way? Are there any efficiencies in ways that maybe we're not doing, or are we really onto something that we're doing right and other people aren't? It just gives you a more holistic view if you're paying attention.
Well said. You also have worked in high threat areas like Iraq and Pakistan. How have working in these kind of areas influenced your approach to security?
I would say it's probably forever changed it. Before I go anywhere, I make sure I understand, if I'm leaving the country, certainly a simple thing is my passport not expired, right? Because a lot of countries, if it expires within 6 months, you should get it renewed before you go, because you might not gain entry or then re-enter to the US. It could be a little bit of a challenge. Do I understand if I'm going somewhere, do I have the proper vaccinations or immunizations? Do I know what will happen for emergency escape? So if there's geopolitical tension somewhere, like what happened, and pick a country, it feels like, right? Pick a country right now in the Middle East and, in some parts of Asia. If you're over there and a tension breaks out, how are you going to get out? Do you know your escape methods, air, land, or sea? Do you know local police forces or your host country or your home country, your embassy or your consulate? And so being prepared, having phone numbers, making sure I understand where medical providers are, where I'll be, making sure I have proper medicine and proper kits on me, and I have emergency contact information. And then it's just mindset. It is understanding where I'm going. And I
Mm,
think a lot of people can forget it is important to understand the culture of where you're going. So
mm,
you understand cultural sensitivities and you can be respectful, because that does go a long way when you're visiting somebody else's country.
mm. Amazing, amazing. And I've often spoken to many Americans, and I think one thing you have, which is fantastic in the US, is that if you're ever traveling outside, you have the right ability to post somewhere on some US government website that I am going to be in this area. And that's very good feedback mechanism I have seen in the US. My
Yeah, that's the State Department. Yeah, they
Yeah.
have that. So it's for travelers. Yep. And
Mm,
it is great.
mm. That's very unique for US citizens. So moving on, Molly, my next question is that what role does innovation play in the field of security and high risk management?
Innovation is changing everything. I think that is the simplest answer. When you look at, to kind of go back to the guns, guards, and gates analogy, right?
Mhm.
When you would have somebody, you would hire private security. They would be on a roving patrol or a static patrol.
Mm,
Now you have enhanced detection and response because you have so many technological advances. You
mm,
can have drones, you can have sensors, you can have tripwires, trail cams that are supposed to be used for hunting and stuff, or even used to pick up
mm,
movement, cybersecurity, enhanced networks, early detection,
mm,
and even physical security has created more sophisticated ways to monitor. And
mm,
so infrared, seeing things in the dark, so it's not just like it looks like just a blob. So all of those things have really just pushed it forward. And
mm,
also when you look at resiliency and recovery,
mm,
that if one system goes down, do you have redundant ways to get another capability back up?
mm,
Or if it's attacked, does it know how to self-repair,
mm,
depending on the automation that you've built? And so I think it is only going to continue to advance and
mm,
improve.
mm. And you did talk a little bit about technology, but do you see this incredible amount of technology that's coming into our lives? What kind of an impact do you see this technology in the field of security and risk management?
I think it's going to change the landscape. I mean, it already is,
Mm,
and it's going to continue to do more so. And
mm,
what I mean by that, so take artificial intelligence, AI. AI is going to fundamentally change every single area that we know of. The world will look different a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now.
mm,
Things will become more automated, more efficient, which is great.
mm,
However, as with anything that can be used for good, there will always be people that'll look to use it for nefarious purposes.
mm,
And so it is understanding how to safeguard that. So one of the risks about AI is having it write code that could take down power grids, that could interfere with air traffic
mm,
control, that could create biological weapons to be
mm,
used against humans. And so those are things that we would not want to have done.
mm.
Ways that we also see advance in the security field. You remember the old Tom Cruise movie,
Yeah.
Minority Report?
Mm,
And so I think we're starting to live a little bit in a Minority Reportish world
mhm,
where there are companies who are testing technology right now that like for example, take California.
mm.
Rising crime in San Francisco and Oakland, well documented in the news.
Yeah.
Police are not responding to crimes that they historically used to. They do not have the staffing, and also there's so many other bigger crimes. So it's simply a matter of supply and demand.
Mm,
So companies are now looking to sell automation to police forces or other private entities
mm,
to sort of police. So nonviolent crimes, thefts, robberies, it's using facial recognition, some forms of identification. The issue with some of it, false positives. It is
mm,
identifying people who did not commit the crime.
mm,
And so until that can really be, I think, the validity rate would have to be so high, because if you start falsely accusing people of crimes they did not commit, that's
right.
also going to further clog up a system, and
Mm,
that's going to increase fear and reduce public trust as well. So it's making sure that what technology is being used for is used for a greater good,
Mm,
and it doesn't have unintended consequences that are pejorative in
mm.
a way that it wasn't meant to.
Well said. And in all this, in the world of security risk management, there's often a talk about what are some of the ethical considerations, that people, which is, experts like you seem to know a lot about each one of us, or could get to
Mhm.
know a lot about us. I'd love to get your perspective on some of the ethical considerations.
I think you have to look at ethics with anything, whether it's risk management, security, like, this is a broad brushstroke response, but what is the objective? What is the goal?
Mm,
And if the objective is keeping people safe, right? So say it's a safety. Okay, what are our tripwires? What are we not going to look for and search for? And so it's not using the technology in ways of which it's not intended,
mm,
right? So if somebody just say is conducting surveillance
mm,
because they're looking to find people who are committing bad acts, or they're very bad people,
mm.
I think most people would say, yes, I want people who are hurting others, who are causing war. We want them, we
Yeah.
want them stopped.
Mm,
But then if you're taking that same technology and you're using it against people for purposes not intended, that
mm.
to me would be an ethical consideration that we should look at. And
Well,
so what are we using it for?
mm,
And if that is being done, what can we do to prevent it? And how do we safeguard it?
well said. My next question, Molly, is what are some of the critical elements of a successful negotiation and to build strategic partnerships?
I think trust, going back to sort of a previous answer, trust and rapport
Mm,
will be, again,
mm,
that is a huge thing in negotiations.
mm,
If you're sitting across the table from somebody and it is hostile, it is aggressive, I think both sides are less likely to concede points.
mm,
And so it's understanding, one, what you want to achieve out of the negotiation.
mm,
And then also two, understanding or trying to understand what the other side wants. Finding where you meet.
mhm,
And if you can identify common ground early, I think that helps build, because that shows that you're both working towards accomplishing a deal or
mm,
reaching an end goal. And then really understanding what they want and paying attention, active listening, instead of just listening and waiting to respond,
mm.
listening to what they're saying, and then using body language, nonverbal cues. Do they seem more hesitant over certain topics? Do they seem more eager on topics? Are they eager because that's a weak area? Or are they hesitant because that's where they're holding their cards back? And really being mindful about paying attention to how they respond verbally and non-verbally. The
Mm,
flip side of that is how you're responding verbally and non-verbally. So
mm,
again, it's being in control of your emotions, your actions, and your speech.
mm.
And so
And
making sure that you're in
sorry, go ahead,
control.
please. Please go
No,
ahead.
please, please.
Mm. So I'm going to ask you that, given the fact that you and I both are from the business world, how important is it for CEOs to prepare a, a you know a strong security plan for their own organizations, and how do they do it?
I think it's critical. Again, it's going back to that in the investment
Mm,
piece that we spoke about just a little bit earlier. It's mitigating risk, and I would say it's also risk that sometimes you can't quantify, like your reputational risk.
mm,
So if you do not build a plan, whether it's a plan for your employees of emergency action, like what would happen in a natural or man-made disaster, so
right.
they understand what to do. But then if it's your executive team, or you're looking at, say, protection when you're traveling, do you have enough security and enough layers to where you feel that your data and your people are protected? There's stories, if you look on the internet, of people tracking like Elon Musk's private jet. Like
Mm,
if they really want to find where somebody is,
mm,
they can maybe find that, and people can use that against
right.
someone. And so building that in and having a plan and understanding what to do
Mm,
when things go bad, it is critical to practice. When an
mm,
emergency happens, people panic. And so you're hoping muscle memory or certain things kick in that'll keep them safe.
mm,
So having that plan for a CEO, for their family, and for their employees, it's an essential.
right. And of course, there's the other aspect of protecting an organization's data, because data, as people say, is now the new oil.
Mhm.
How does one prepare a strategic plan to protect your data from your own employees and from outsiders?
Yeah, so you raised the topic of own employees, so insider threat. And so, it's need to know data segregation.
Mm.
And so it is having your data firewalled or binned off into areas to where if HR needs data for HR tasks, they should have access to it. But somebody who's not HR shouldn't. If
Mm.
an engineer needs something for research and development, they have that, but maybe they do not have the access to something else on a different project. And so it's really making sure that people have what they need to do their jobs,
Mm.
but they don't have enough to put everything together.
Mm.
And then if there's any keystroke logging for businesses, if there's any unusual activity of downloads or printing things out, or it seems like data is being extracted in a certain way,
Mm.
those could all be things that look at. Because why would, say, just to use like an engineer, if they're putting, they're burning data or they're putting it on a thumb drive and taking it out, why do they have a need to? So have you disabled certain ports and certain capabilities?
Right.
So that would help with insider threat.
Mm.
Externally, firewalls, protection, cybersecurity, having a sound IT plans and programs,
Mm.
having technology to identify
Mm.
if you're getting attacked, and also educating your employees on what are risks, what are things that people from the outside can attack. There's also, like, to use like Deloitte and KPMG. So for some of their workers who are going to China and Hong Kong, because they've identified that the countries are stealing their data,
Mm.
they are sending their employees over with computers that are only loaded with the data to deal with their customers and their clients in those countries.
Mm.
And anything else is not on there.
Yeah.
So because, different countries will have different data
Yeah.
privacy
Yeah.
rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if they grab the data, if you grab everything, you kind of have the keys to the kingdom. But if you only have the data for the client you're going to go see in that specific country, that's a way to sort of compress it as well.
What a great response. Thank you. And this is going to be
Mhm.
helpful to a lot of our viewers and listeners who are large company executives, who are smart startup entrepreneurs, founders, and so on. Thank you. So I have time for two more questions for you. Uh,
Sure.
can you talk about a significant security challenge you have overcome in your career? And of course, I don't want any names.
Sure. I would say, the significant security challenge, it's generational, which
Mm.
is probably not the answer that you would expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
But take any corporation, any business that you're in. When you started to where you are now,
Mm.
you once were, the newbie, then you became the seasoned employee, and then you became, sort of, the definitely more seasoned employee. And it is having different thinking, different generations come together, understanding the common goal.
Mm.
And it is, I think when I was younger and earlier in my career, I didn't see it as much as I do now. Of sometimes we are not getting to our yes or to our common goal because it's generational issues that we have not, that are kind of getting in the way. And I think that can just impede progress. And that can have a lot of unintended consequences.
Well said. And my last question to you, Molly. Um, if I was to ask you to look in your crystal ball and say, look at global security, what trends do you see in the future?
I think, going back to artificial intelligence, I think it's going to take over so much. And with security, when you look at just staying on the AI theme, deep fakes, so voice fakes, lots of voice scams where people are getting scammed out of money because they're cloning somebody's voice of a loved one. And again, it's that emotion. You think a loved one is in trouble and they need money. People are emptying their bank accounts, they're giving credit card numbers. And so these scams are widespread.
Mm.
Deep fake photos too. So, there's a funny one of the Pope. He's in like this big, like puffy white jacket. And so it caused a little bit of an uproar for people. But if you actually look at the photo, if you look at his hands and you kind of look at some of the things around him, they don't match his body and it's blurred. and there's deep fakes of Donald Trump. There's, I guess, some pretty scandalous ones of Taylor Swift. And so what that can do for business people or even just everyday people, making sure you're verifying the data, whether it's video data, audio data, or a photo, understanding where that source is coming from, because scams are only going to get more intricate as technology advances. And so it's understanding and having ways to safeguard yourself.
Wonderful. And on that note, Molly, and your last amazing line, don't take anything at face value, be careful. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about different aspects of risk management, high-stake negotiations, and interrogation techniques. You gave all of us an amazing 101 for travel to high-threat countries. You also gave us some amazing pointers for data security breaches and data security protection. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Oh, thank you. This was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.